Savannah, Georgia, spread itself in warm light and ocean breeze, but inside the river's household, the glow dimmed. The neighborhood favored order and stability, measuring worth in steady paychecks and predictable careers. Lucas Rivers grew up among manicured hedges and whispered warnings about impractical dreams. Creativity was tolerated as weekend amusement, not a future. His notebooks, however, overflowed with sketches of glowing structures, diagrams of rhythm and light, half blueprints, half music scores. He imagined merging architecture and motion, designing rooms that breathed and shifted with the people inside them. But each time he showed a drawing, a cold remark would dismiss it. Pages crumpled in his fist became more common than words of encouragement. The house held its own gravity. His parents' voices praised accountants and engineers, not dreamers. Their world was wrapped in the comfort of safety nets, where failure was avoided at all cost. Risk, to them, was a flaw. Lucas learned silence early. His response to mockery became withdrawal. At night, when the house slept, he carried his tools to the garage. The wooden table became his true desk, layered with wires, diodes, and improvised frames. There he built in secret, soldering circuits while moths circled the bulb overhead. His creations flickered briefly, pulsing like strange fireflies. In those moments, the world outside, the dismissive laughter, the heavy expectations, faded. Every snide remark carved patience into him. Every eye roll taught him endurance. By the time he entered high school, Lucas no longer tried to argue. He saved his energy for the hours after midnight, when only he and his inventions remained awake. He collected scraps from construction sites, borrowed books from the library, and scavenged tutorials from forgotten corners of the internet. Knowledge became a private currency. He invested it carefully, brick by brick, into a future no one else believed in. The family table, always polished and pristine, symbolized his parents' certainty. Lucas nodded through dinners, though inside he built other worlds. He remembered walking by the Savannah riverfront, watching the surface catch fire in the sunset. The rippling reflections convinced him that light could tell stories. If water could transform sunlight into moving art, so could he. Years hardened his resolve. Attempts to share victories, small grants, a mention in a student magazine, design competition sketches, met only gray skies at home. His achievements vanished into the fog of parental rationality. He decided persuasion was wasted breath. Instead, he embraced a quieter formula, not to convince, but to prove. He carried that mantra like armor, silent and unshakable. Day jobs sustained him. He folded shirts at a store, delivered food, worked backstage at theaters. These tasks paid bills, but his nights remained devoted to his glowing experiments. Every saved dollar went into supplies. He bought aluminum for frames, recycled glass for diffusers, and collected spools of cable. Each item represented a piece of the world he intended to raise from shadows. Lucas saw himself as a craftsman of invisible things. He shaped silence into determination, failure into lessons, and darkness into light. Each setback only added weight to his quiet promise. In the garage, he built alone, but the hum of transformers and soft click of relays kept him company. The table bore burn marks and solder stains, scars of persistence. Sometimes exhaustion blurred his vision. He'd rest his head on coiled wires, dreaming of rooms that glowed with his designs. In those dreams, no one mocked him. Instead, entire cities admired the landscapes of light. The world outside demanded conformity, but he carried rebellion in secret. His rebellion was not loud. It was steady, disciplined, almost invisible. Lucas never sought approval. Approval had been denied too many times to matter anymore. What he sought was form, the shape of his own voice translated into beams and currents. On nights when fog rolled through Savannah and street lamps blurred into halos, Lucas felt closer to his goal. He twisted wires, tightened bolts, and whispered a vow only the shadows heard, to build a world that pulsed with light, even if his own family tried to snuff it out. The house where he grew up muted dreams, but in silence, he taught himself to make them blaze brighter. The name arrived like a spark. LARK. It was simple, yet stubborn. A bird that sang before dawn, defying silence with fragile persistence. To Lucas, it carried the weight of anonymity and resilience, a mask that concealed yet gave flight. He registered the brand under that name, typed it into online forms, and opened an email account without revealing a face. LARK was no one, and that was precisely its strength. Building the website became an act of erasure and reinvention. No biography appeared. No photo anchored it to a real body. Only images of luminous shapes filled the screen, accompanied by cryptic captions. Lucas wanted the work to stand alone, stripped of history, free of prejudice. He longed for the world to react to his vision without weighing it against his origins or his parents' scorn. His first collection emerged in silence. Sculptures made of wire, glass, and circuitry awakened at human footsteps. Shoes tapped the ground, and colors rippled in response, as if space itself exhaled. Each piece pulsed with rhythm, guided by algorithms Lucas had written on long nights. The installations were fragile, yet alive, breathing only when touched by others. To carry them, he crafted a case from wood and aluminum, lined with foam. He loaded the pieces into an old van he had stripped and rebuilt, transforming it into a traveling studio. Local bars and co-working spaces became his first stages. Owners offered corners or empty walls where LARK's experiments could flicker in the dark. At first, the city hesitated. Visitors lingered briefly, unsure if the glowing structures were toys or art. Their curiosity, however, grew with each step-activated burst of light. Photographers recorded short clips. One video spread through social media, gathering likes from strangers who whispered the name LARK with curiosity. Museums noticed. Small institutions extended invitations for night shows, granting him hours when galleries transformed into breathing, shifting landscapes. Lucas refined his craft, speaking to space as though it were alive. Each installation became a dialogue, a quiet exchange of energy and response. The need to prove himself to his parents dissolved in these moments. LARK existed outside that household, untethered to judgment. The pseudonym became armor. It shielded him from comparisons and expectations, letting him create without the sting of old mockery. He felt free walking into events where no one recognized him. He was not Lucas Rivers, son of skeptics, but LARK, a figure of his own making. Every show added a brick to the wall of protection around his fragile dream. The wall grew higher, more resilient, blocking the sharp arrows of memory. He guarded his real name like a flame in the wind. It remained hidden, fragile, and untouchable, sheltered by the mask he had built. In anonymity, he discovered strength. People discussed his work, not his past. They debated color, rhythm, and design, never asking about family or roots. The distance allowed him to breathe. LARK could stand under scrutiny that Lucas could not. The mask absorbed the gaze, leaving the creator untouched. He continued expanding the project. Each piece pushed boundaries, adding layers of complexity. He studied how movement shaped perception, how light could echo emotion. Workshops filled with discarded cables and shattered glass became his sanctuaries. The van smelled of solder and dust, yet to him it was a cathedral. He wrote grant applications under the pseudonym, and sometimes, to his surprise, funding appeared. The name grew legitimacy on paper as well as in whispers. LARK became both shield and sword. It blocked old wounds but also cut through barriers of doubt and indifference. As the months unfolded, Lucas learned to separate his two lives completely. At home he was ordinary, silent, unremarkable. In the city, he was LARK, a presence that sparked intrigue. This duality allowed survival. The fragile boy who once crumpled sketches at the dinner table remained safe, hidden behind the glowing mask of invention. The city continued to respond. Each event gathered larger crowds. Journalists sought interviews, though he declined, offering only statements about the work, never the self. The more the pseudonym grew, the less weight his birth name carried in his mind. He began to think of LARK not as a disguise, but as his truer form. The brand gained momentum. Invitations arrived from beyond Savannah. Spaces in Atlanta, Charleston, even New Orleans opened doors. Each journey reinforced the lesson. The mask was necessary. The work needed to be free from the smallness of his childhood home. Lucas began to savor the secrecy. Walking among crowds that marveled at his creations without knowing the man behind them filled him with quiet satisfaction. The armor thickened with every success. LARK was untouchable, immune to mockery, admired in circles that Lucas never thought he would reach, and within that hidden strength, he found peace. The pseudonym no longer felt like a mere alias. It had become his shield, his sanctuary, his rebirth. The boy whose dreams were once silenced had finally forged a name that spoke louder than his own. Anonymity carried a price. It demanded long nights of solitude, endless walks between his workshop and the storage unit, and shipments that arrived late or broken. The silence between emails that never received replies weighed heavier than any tool in his hands. There were evenings when the city felt deaf, its streets mute, its people blind. Only the river seemed to speak, shimmering with lights from the opposite shore, a distant reminder that life pulsed beyond his walls. Some nights the installations failed. Wires burned out, circuits refused to respond, sensors misread signals. Each collapse forced him to start again, to mend and adjust. Venue rentals often fell apart. Promises from managers dissolved, leaving him with packed cases and no stage. Each rejection carved resilience deeper into his bones. Grants he applied for slipped into the hands of others. He read the lists of winners like obituaries of his hope, yet he never stopped applying. Patience became his craft. He learned to repair rather than discard, to cut back designs when budgets shrank, and to wait without bitterness when doors stayed closed. Over time, small audiences began returning. A few familiar faces appeared at pop-up shows, tracing the evolution of his work. Their presence anchored him in moments of doubt. One video recorded during a midnight exhibition spread online, gathering hundreds of thousands of views. Strangers shared it with awe, repeating the name LARK as if it carried mystery. The attention grew into opportunity. A technology company reached out, seeking an installation for a product launch. They wanted spectacle paired with meaning, not just decoration. Lucas designed light that lived only when people engaged with it. The room brightened and dimmed in sync with movement, as though the crowd's presence powered the art itself. The launch succeeded without a single image of the artist. His name remained hidden, his work celebrated under the pseudonym that shielded him. Within small circles, LARK became a whispered presence. The name appeared on flyers, tagged in videos, and spoken in quiet admiration among those who valued the unusual. Friends brought friends to see the shows, curious to witness the elusive installations that seemed to appear and vanish like sparks in the dark. Lucas kept his private life sealed away. The workshop echoed with music, cutting tools, and the sharp scent of flux. His apartment, by contrast, was sparse and silent. Meals were often eaten standing, one hand scrolling through notes on his phone while the other held bread or fruit. Rest became an afterthought. He returned again and again to the workbench, chasing perfection. Each idea captured in his phone became a wire bent, a circuit soldered, a structure lifted. His days blurred into cycles of building and recovery. Sleep was short, dreams filled with visions of glowing frameworks and untested algorithms. One evening, pausing between projects, Lucas realized he no longer felt the urge to call his parents with news. Contracts, grants, exhibitions. All no longer needed their validation. The hunger for recognition had shifted inward. Success no longer meant applause or acceptance, but the quiet satisfaction of watching a design finally breathe. The riverfront walks remained his ritual. He watched light ripple across the water, imagining his own work as another reflection woven into the current. Failure stopped feeling like defeat. Each misstep became material for the next attempt, a lesson soldered into the wires. The name LARK carried momentum. It gathered reputation without exposing him, a cloak that allowed growth without vulnerability. Crowds responded with curiosity. Some treated the installations as play, others as profound. Lucas let both reactions exist, taking strength from the diversity of response. His calendar filled with small shows and hidden contracts. It was not fame, but it was enough to keep the dream alive and moving forward. In the quiet of night, he sometimes wondered if anonymity was freedom or exile. The mask gave him strength, but also separated him from recognition as himself. Still, he chose the mask. Without it, the weight of past ridicule might have crushed him. With it, he thrived unseen, building piece by piece. The years passed in this rhythm: creation, failure, adjustment, survival. A life of silence but also of progress. By the time his work began to attract serious attention, Lucas had changed. He no longer chased applause. He pursued only the dialogue between light and space. The boy who once trembled at rejection had become the man who built patiently in shadows. The price of invisibility was steep, but he paid it willingly. His life outside the workshop shrank, but his inner world grew vast, filled with ideas, experiments, and the certainty that the path was his alone. Anonymity had taken much, but it had also given him the one thing he needed most: the freedom to build without permission. And in those silent years without a name, Lucas forged the resilience that would carry him further than recognition ever could. The invitation came in spring 2024. A creative hub in downtown Savannah planned a grand night festival of light. They sought a central piece that would command attention and leave echoes long after the crowd dispersed. Lucas saw the opportunity as the culmination of years spent in silence and persistence. For the first time, he had a stage vast enough to carry his vision beyond whispers. He proposed a cycle titled Reconstruction of Silence. It was not merely an installation, but a living system designed to listen as much as it spoke. The plan included glowing arches that shifted with the rhythm of breath, panels that mirrored heartbeats, and a dome that gathered fragments of individual light into one shared constellation. Each element demanded precise engineering and fragile sensitivity. The piece required not only technical mastery, but faith that strangers would complete it with their presence. Lucas poured himself into preparation. He calibrated sensors, welded frames, and tested algorithms late into the night. Failure meant not embarrassment, but collapse of the entire experience. The festival accepted his proposal. LARK's name appeared on posters, bold letters marking the centerpiece of the event. The mask had now grown into a brand recognized by the city. Lucas knew this project was more than art. It was a statement, a bridge between his secret years and a public acknowledgement of his work. In the quiet of his apartment, he sealed envelopes addressed to his family. Each contained a minimal VIP invitation stamped with the curator's signature and festival logo. He wanted them to see his creation without prejudice, to experience it before knowing who stood behind it. The gesture was not revenge, but revelation. The night approached quickly. Savannah filled with advertisements, neon banners, and excited chatter. Tourists booked hotels, and locals rearranged schedules. Lucas rehearsed the sequence again and again. He watched the arches glow with simulated breaths, felt the panels pulse with test data, and saw the dome weave light into a sky of borrowed stars. Doubts haunted him in quiet hours. What if the sensors failed? What if the audience dismissed it as novelty? The stakes pressed heavily on his chest. Yet he carried a calm resolve. This was the project he had been building toward since the garage experiments of his youth. He refused to step back. The city accepted him more than he had expected. Journalists wrote previews describing LARK as a mysterious pioneer of interactive light. Crowds anticipated the unveiling. On the morning of the event, he walked through the empty hall. The scaffolding still smelled of metal and dust. Soon, it would hold the weight of thousands of eyes. Technicians checked cables, adjusted projectors, and synchronized sensors. Lucas oversaw every detail, speaking little, focusing on the hum of readiness. Outside, booths filled with food vendors, musicians tuned instruments, and volunteers organized entry lines. The festival was transforming into a living organism. Evening arrived with the warmth of spring air and a hum of voices. The city's heartbeat gathered in the center, waiting for light to awaken. Lucas dressed simply, wearing no mark of authorship. He blended with staff, moving quietly among the crowd as if only a caretaker of something larger. The first visitors entered the hall. Their footsteps triggered faint responses. Colors shimmered along arches, following the rhythm of lungs filling and emptying. Panels responded to palms placed gently against them. Pulses of light beat in unison with the touch of human skin. The dome overhead remained dim at first, saving its strength for the accumulation of many. Lucas watched as fragments of light slowly gathered, each visitor leaving a trace. The audience began to hush. Laughter turned into wonder. People moved slowly, experimenting with breath, touch, and proximity, realizing they were part of the composition. Lucas observed from a corner. He did not need to guide or explain. The installation itself was the teacher, leading strangers into shared silence. His family entered later, recognizable even from a distance. They moved cautiously, scanning the displays, unaware of the author's presence among them. They lingered at the dome, watching as it brightened with every person's contribution. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to awe as the constellation formed. The hall filled with quiet reverence. Hundreds stood beneath the dome, their lights merging into one shifting tapestry. For a moment, everyone belonged. Lucas felt the culmination of years compress into that instant. He had reached the place he had imagined alone at his workbench, soldering circuits in the dark. The invitations had brought his family there, but the work itself kept them. They were not spectators of their son's defiance, but participants in his creation. The city accepted him with open silence. Applause had not yet erupted, but the air carried a resonance more powerful than clapping hands. For Lucas, the trial was not in proving himself, but in surrendering control, letting the audience breathe life into his design. When the dome finally glowed at full capacity, a galaxy born from hundreds of breaths and beats, the crowd exhaled in collective wonder. In that moment, Lucas knew he had succeeded, not as a son seeking validation, but as an artist whose vision had merged with the life of a city. The night was not about victory over the past, but about building a frame for everything he had lived through. His gesture was a bridge, not a weapon. As people filed out, their voices carried fragments of excitement. They did not know the man among them was the creator, and that anonymity still felt right. Lucas stayed behind, watching the last traces of light fade from the dome. The hall was empty again, but the silence was different now, alive, expansive, and earned. The city had accepted him, and the night had tested him. Both had left him standing, stronger than before, ready for what came next. Savannah breathed with warm humidity and the hum of voices that evening. Crowds gathered, drifting toward the central hall where anticipation already thickened the air like mist. As the first visitors entered, the installation stirred awake. Sensors caught their breath, translating exhalations into faint ripples of light. The hall shimmered as though it had taken its first breath. The dome glowed faintly, catching sparks of each new arrival. Every person became a living lantern, their presence reflected like a window shining at night. Lucas stood behind the control desk, blending with the crew. His badge carried only the project's title, no hint of authorship. He watched as strangers discovered their influence over the space. At first they laughed, waving arms to test reactions. Slowly, they moved with reverence, realizing they held fragile power. Smiles faded into quiet awe. Feet slowed, steps softened, as if each visitor feared breaking the fragile dialogue between body and light. The room became a breathing forest of glass and color. Each flicker felt intimate. Each glow like a whisper returned. Lucas's chest tightened at the sight. Then he saw them. His parents entered almost on time, their silhouettes immediately recognizable. Even from across the room, their habits betrayed them. They paused by the program stand, reading with their usual seriousness, then walked deeper into the hall. Their heads tilted back as the dome answered the crowd. They photographed the arches, listened as a neighbor explained excitedly that LARK was a rare voice in contemporary art. Lucas stayed still, hidden among cables and monitors. The words they heard around them were the words he had once longed to hear at home. The hall swelled with bodies, the air charged with collective energy. Light flowed from one figure to another, merging into a tapestry of silent connection. The installation had reached its crescendo. Breaths overlapped, heartbeats pulsed through panels, and the dome became a quiet galaxy suspended above them. At last, the projection shifted. The wall filled with sketches, fragile lines drawn late at night. It showed notes from testing, hands stained by silver dust. The audience leaned closer. Faces reflected the glow of a story unfolding without narration. Only images spoke, showing the invisible labor behind the beauty. A final slide appeared, a child's notebook page, crooked diagrams scrawled in pencil. Next to them, a note declared that light could answer footsteps. The audience hushed, sensing intimacy. The page remained for several seconds, fragile and vulnerable against the vast projection. Then came the white card. Its message was brief. The author would reveal his name here and now. The hall stilled to silence. Lucas stepped forward. He walked without grandeur, as though adjusting equipment. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, almost casual. At the center, he removed his badge. The name LARK slipped away with it. He lifted his gaze toward the glowing dome, his expression steady. He did not speak aloud to the crowd, but within himself he said his true name. The silence made it enough. The technicians dimmed the arches and panels, leaving only a soft wash of light across his face. For the first time, he was visible as himself. The audience clapped politely at first, unsure of what they had witnessed. Then recognition bloomed, and applause grew heavier, warmer, as if an unspoken story had reached its ending. Lucas stood beneath the glow, hearing the rhythm of clapping blend with the last fading heartbeats stored in the panels. In one row, motion froze. His family sat still, caught in the moment like figures inside glass. Their silence contrasted sharply with the storm of approval. Lucas met no eyes directly, but he felt the weight of their stillness pressing across the room. That silence was the same house where dreams once whispered quietly. Now the hall itself became a mirror. The audience saw the man behind LARK, and his family saw themselves reflected in the crowd's celebration. Applause swelled, rolling like waves. It was not just for the work, but for the courage of revealing. The hall pulsed with recognition, acceptance, and release. The masks of anonymity had dissolved. What remained was truth, refracted in the glow of hundreds of strangers, turned mirrors for one man's journey. Lucas stayed calm, neither triumphant nor apologetic. He simply stood as himself, framed by the very light he had once built in secret. The moment lingered longer than expected. People clapped until their hands ached, until the dome seemed to echo with invisible thunder. The night had become what he intended. Not vengeance, but revelation. His life, once hidden behind a mask, now stood reflected in every face before him. The dome above flickered with the remnants of stored light, galaxies dissolving into silence. For Lucas, it was enough. After the finale, silence lingered in the hall, rare and fragile. The crowd remained, sharing videos, whispering about how light had learned to listen. Phones glowed as people tried to capture what words could not. Eyes searched for the author, hoping to turn admiration into a handshake. Lucas stood steady, accepting thanks with a calm smile, noting how freely he breathed when no justification was needed. Each greeting carried warmth rather than doubt. Applause had faded, but the energy of recognition still pulsed through the air. He felt no need to explain himself. The work spoke louder than any defense he could have made in his youth. In the crowd, two familiar figures stood apart. Their posture betrayed them, even before their faces did. His parents lingered on the edge of the celebration. Their expressions carried no disguise. Surprise mingled with unease, joined by the late effort of recalling when paths had diverged so completely. Lucas did not approach. He had already given what he could, an invitation, a chance to witness, a frame to understand the years they had dismissed. The rest was no longer his burden. The silence between them had been shaped long before this night, and nothing he said could unmake it. His team beckoned him to another hall, eager to discuss touring schedules, new cities, and possibilities of expanding into open-air spaces. The vibration of his phone reminded him of the wider world. Messages flooded in, curators, sponsors, universities, and foundations all reaching out. One message carried a particular weight. A children's hospital offered to host his installations, believing light could comfort where medicine could not. The future opened before him, not as a dream, but as a map unfolding in real time. His work had found its place beyond him. Lucas lifted his gaze to the dome once more. Among thousands of captured moments, his own spark remained, small, yet insistent. The glow reminded him of late nights in the garage, when a single fuse blowing felt like the end of everything. He had continued anyway. Every broken circuit, every failed grant, every dismissal had converged into this quiet fullness. What filled him now was not triumph, but completion. The circle had closed, not with vengeance, but with clarity. The silence inside him was not the silence of rejection. It was not the silence of resentment. It was the silence of resolution. He remembered the garage, the hiss of solder, the stubbornness that carried him past doubt. The memory no longer burned. It simply existed. The present shimmered brighter than the past. He had built something larger than bitterness, larger than names, larger even than himself. Savannah exhaled around him, its streets carrying the scent of the sea, its skyline reflecting the glow of the festival into the night. The river moved steadily toward the ocean, carrying mirrored fragments of light like offerings to a wider horizon. His name no longer needed to fight for volume. It did not need to be louder than applause or sharper than silence. It simply belonged. It rested beside his work, beside the people who gathered not for conflict, but for light. The home where his dreams were once muted would have to choose how to live with the new resonance. That decision was no longer his. Every person must learn in their own way how to listen. His parents faced that task now, just as he once had. For Lucas, the lesson was different. At last, he had found his own way of listening, one that did not seek permission. The applause had faded. The hall was emptying. Yet his name remained, carried not by noise but by presence. It lived in the memory of those who had seen, in the dome that had reflected breath and heartbeat, and in the quiet confidence that filled him now. A name once doubted had become unshakable truth, not because it was shouted, but because it was lived. Lucas Rivers stood within that truth. For the first time, it felt enough.